Thrawn, one of the most iconic Star Wars characters in the entire rich and illustrious history of a galaxy far, far away. One that has achieved icon status in both the expanded universe era of the 90s into the 2010s and the Disney-owned era of canon Star Wars storytelling from 2012 to today. When the original Heir to the Empire book trilogy penned by Timothy Zahn hit shelves, Star Wars fans hungry for more stories following the climactic finale to the original trilogy embraced the blue Imperial officer as if he was along for the ride in the 70s and 80s. And for good reason. We had never gotten a character like this before. An Imperial officer, but not one that we're used to rooting against or for. He wasn't human, had blue skin and red eyes, and unlike the usual gray-blue Imperial look that has become a staple in Star Wars, he had a white uniform with gold epaulets. Every aspect of his character was designed and constructed to be a more refined version of what we already knew about Imperial officers. But perhaps the greatest difference is Thrawn's tactical genius. His military mind. He is by far, in both the expanded universe and the canon timeline, the most intelligent and tactically gifted military mind in the entire Star Wars universe. He is a cheat code when it comes to naval warfare. That's why the only way to explain why the Empire lost the Galactic Civil War against the Rebel Alliance was to literally send Thrawn to another galaxy. I've been fascinated with the character of Thrawn for years, long before he made his canon debut in Star Wars Rebels. I read Outbound Flight, obviously Heir to the Empire, and it was so refreshing to see an Imperial that was an actual threat to our heroes that wasn't named Darth Vader or Emperor Palpatine. This opinion has not changed at all with the reintroduction of the character via the canon novels, once again penned by Zahn. The first three novels, Thrawn, Thrawn Alliances, and Thrawn Treason, showed that Zahn hasn't missed a beat, and why should he? The character was created by him. But it's the Ascendancy trilogy that has traveled the most new ground in regards to what we know and understand about Thrawn. In it, we learn about Thrawn's naval career with the Chief's expansionary fleet in the decades that precede him battling the rebels and before he joined forces with the Empire. We have a little bit of discourse that's been going around since the end of the most recent Star Wars show, Ahsoka. Some spoilers for Ahsoka, by the way, if you aren't caught up. The main beat of the story is that Sabine Wren and Ahsoka Tano are continuing their search for Grand Admiral Thrawn, and perhaps even by extension Ezra Bridger, who disappeared from the Star Wars galaxy in the finale of Star Wars Rebels, which was about 11 years ago, give or take, assisted by the space whales, the Purgles. So Thrawn is the overarching antagonist of the series, and he is definitely the antagonist of the series. Though he continues to sport the trademark refined personality and tactical genius that he has had for the past 3 decades, he is perhaps more menacing, more imposing, more ruthless than he has ever been before, at least in the canon timeline. I suppose after 11 years trapped in an entirely different galaxy, slowly losing more and more of your troops and resources with limited ways to get back, even the most calm and collected leader will start to have less patience for BS. Anyway, in terms of his role as the primary antagonist of the final 3 episodes of Ahsoka, he serves the role of villain well. So what's the problem? Well, there is this concern from a certain sect of the Star Wars community, spearheaded by who many of us affectionately know as Cheese Twitter, that the vision of Timothy Zahn, the creator of Thrawn, is at risk of being brushed aside. Normally, if an author created a character for a book that we're writing in the Star Wars universe, scrutiny for that character's portrayal in different media would almost never reach high levels. When a character has only ever appeared in 1 or 2 novels, adapting that character does not carry a lot of pressure. Thrawn has pretty much never been in that category. From the beginning, his time in a galaxy far, far away, beginning in the early 90s when Michael Jordan hadn't even won his 2nd championship yet, Zahn had captured the essence of the character and intrigued thousands of fans the moment they started reading about him. As the years and eventually decades went by, Thrawn's popularity only grew. Even during the quieter years when Star Wars waned in popularity, Thrawn remained an instantly recognizable figure. A character that has awed generations of Star Wars fans both within canon and preceding the days of the Disney era of Star Wars. And I think that might be part of the problem. And what is the problem? It's a question. Is this Thrawn? Is this the Grand Admiral I remember, the one that ruthlessly terrorized the New Republic in his campaign to restore the Galactic Empire to its former glory? The one that went toe-to-toe with Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia Organa? The one that utilized the power of the Isla Miri in order to gain an upper hand? The cold and brutal tactician that all enemies to him feared? Is this Thrawn? Is this the man who we saw rise through the ranks of the Chief's ascendancy? As we learn about his people through his eyes and conversations, we the reader are intimate with his thoughts, his fear for his people and a desire to keep them safe and secure. We watch as he experiences the xenophobia that comes with being the only alien in the Galactic Empire. After 6 books telling the story of how he got to Star Wars Rebels, we know him better than most characters. When a character like Thrawn establishes himself in one story and timeline and then is re-established in another, it may cause some confusion. There are 2 primary understandings about who Thrawn is and what role he is supposed to serve in the current Star Wars story. One is that Thrawn is a stone-cold and ruthless military leader, albeit one with significantly more developed and nuance than virtually any other Star Wars antagonist in any era. A man who believes in the security of his people through the security of the Galactic Empire and its existence. Aside from his nuanced positions, he is at his heart not good. He is the military arm of a fascist government that believes that order and military force are the answers. This position and line of thinking stem from what role Thrawn served in the expanded universe stories of the 90s and 2000s. One that unambiguously marks him as a villain. One that cares for his people, but a villain nonetheless. The other idea of who Thrawn is carries over much of the former. He is still a cold and ruthless tactician, a genius in his field, but one who is significantly more sympathetic because there is a greater focus on his desire to protect his people, the Chiefs. And so the lengths he is willing to go to ultimately protect his people, while some actions are not condoned, are defensible more or less. A man who doesn't believe in the Empire the same way that Palpatine or even Tarkin does. His faith in the Empire is hardly faith at all. Its existence is required to keep the Chiefs safe. His loyalty to the Empire is contingent on its ability to protect and defend the Chiefs. He even recognizes several of the key issues with the Empire. He doesn't unnecessarily kill. He works towards the most effective and least invasive strategy when making a decision, and tries to minimize casualties and damage. This understanding of Thrawn comes primarily from the 6 canon Star Wars novels written by Zan: Thrawn, Thrawn Alliances, Thrawn Treason, and then the prequel novel set before these, collectively titled the Ascendancy Trilogy. So there's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to understanding what Thrawn is, how he's intended to be viewed, and in my opinion, the answer to the question of who is Thrawn is all of the above. Normally, I'd say that canon supersedes all other variations of a character's story. Heir to the Empire, Outbound Flight, these are all excellent additions to your library and provide us with excellent Thrawn-centered adventures and highlights for the Chiefs. But when we discuss Thrawn's portrayal in canon, it's best we use canon sources to work off of it. That's what I'd say in any other situation. But Thrawn is, once again, special. To me, Zan has carefully crafted this character so well that it almost feels like he exists simultaneously in canon storytelling as well as his original books. I think Zan even mentioned in the past that he writes Thrawn that way. It's probably why Thrawn's first encounter with the Empire was largely unchanged from the original story. With that in mind, I look at all aspects of Thrawn in all of his media. Thrawn is nowhere near the cruelty of someone like Vader or Tarkin, and does not possess the black heart of someone like Palpatine. No one does, in fairness. He is about as good as you could ever hope for in an Imperial officer. But he is an Imperial officer, a high-ranking one at that, and one whose goals, no matter how sympathetic, come at the cost of thousands of lives. Several terms and phrases keep popping in my head whenever I think of Thrawn. Lesser evil, ends justify the means, pragmatic. I think they all associate to some degree. Thrawn's portrayal in Ahsoka was largely well received, but for those who have become invested in his story, particularly the parts that have been focused heavily on via novels written by his creator, his goals have sparked debate about whether Dave Filoni understands what Thrawn's role is supposed to be, what his goals should be, etc. And if you're looking for the answer to that, I fear we won't know until we see how Thrawn's arc plays out, and that moment is still likely several years away. The Grisk threat that has been a constant source of concern for Thrawn in virtually every piece of canon media penned by Zan is yet to be mentioned or even referenced anywhere else, including the Ahsoka series. So if his story ends without a single nod to the threat that is supposedly driving his desire to reform the Empire, I would be at minimum a little disappointed, and I wouldn't blame anyone else for feeling similarly. Now, I'm comfortable calling Thrawn a bad guy. I'm aware that he has nuances and he isn't the worst person you'll meet from the Empire by a wide margin, but I've been of the opinion that serving the Galactic Empire, a fascist regime whose existence is predicated on subjugation and intimidation of others, means you're fair game when it comes to being called bad. Critics of the canon portrayal of Thrawn have argued that Zan is making a push to rehabilitate Thrawn's image. Instead of being a ruthless and unforgiving imperial military leader, he has effectively become an anti-hero and, in some rare cases, a full-blown hero. But I'm not sure I ever agreed with that argument. I've always looked at it as expanding the history of Thrawn like you would any character. Larger-than-life figures on the good and bad side of history have to start somewhere. No one is a pure paragon of truth and honor, and no one is incapable of having respectable beliefs and codes even when they serve an ultimately bad faction. It's complicated, and until we finish his story, we won't have all the pieces. Typically, it's exhausting for me to get bogged down in the Star Wars discourse of the week, but this is one of the few instances where I enjoy discussing it because it really is a fascinating case. A character that has existed for 30 years, continuing to intrigue audiences in all forms of media. For a character that made his debut in a novel almost a decade after the last Star Wars movie at the time left theaters. That's impressive. I do think many people are so fascinated with the character of Thrawn that they find themselves wanting to root for him. And rooting for most characters requires a justification for doing so, even a subconscious one, which is why I think we see so many arguments, very passionate ones, over whether Thrawn is good or evil. But I also think that this is a result of a character with such a rich history. Half a dozen canon books exist of his adventures. Anyone who has had 6 novels written about their lives is going to be more complex than one that we are just being introduced to. I think that's how Thrawn should be viewed, right now. He is the antagonist of Ahsoka, the presumed villain of this upcoming conflict, now that he has returned to the main Star Wars galaxy. And like most developed characters, Thrawn is multifaceted. It doesn't mean that he is a hero. It doesn't mean that he's a villain on the level of a Sith Lord like Palpatine. It just means that he has his reasons, good and bad, for doing what he does. And an adversary that has their reasons for doing what they do, that leaves the hero with no choice but to pause and at least tip their hat to them, even as an enemy, is a byproduct of good storytelling and an excellently fleshed out character. We will not know where Thrawn's story takes him next for a while. It's the most frustrating part about these kinds of conversations. It is rare for a character with so much history to still be such an enigma. But I'm willing to wait and see what Lucasfilm has in store for him in what is quite possibly the final hurrah of Grand Admiral Thrawn. I hope you all enjoyed this special video. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more, and hit the bell icon so that you're among the first to see any new content going forward. As always, this is Mesa Windu out, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.